Hey there, thanks for tuning into Duck Bricks. I'm Chris, and I just received the brand new LEGO Summer Star Wars Wave early, and this is a really exciting one. I obviously grew up with the Clone Wars TV show. That was my Star Wars media when I was a kid, and so to get an entire wave focused on a lot of the nostalgic callbacks to that series is really exciting. A brand new V19 Torrent, which we haven't seen since 2008. An actual Separatist MTT, which we've literally never gotten, and I loved so much, I actually built a mock out of it, a mock version of it, which I got the instructions for online, and finally, we have one as an actual LEGO set. Of course, that's not to mention an actual minifigure scale Django Fetts Slave 1, or at least minifigure compatible, as opposed to the UCS one, which gives folks an alternate option to be able to add it to their collection, and of course, so much more. A new turbo tank, a battle pack. This is a pretty great wave of LEGO Star Wars in my opinion, and I'm here to do an early review on every single one of the sets right now. So let's jump in. Here is the August 2025 wave of LEGO Star Wars sets, minus one, which I, for whatever reason, am not allowed to review for the next 2 days, and this might be one of the most controversial waves of all time. On one hand, some of the builds are really fantastic, and they're dealing with subject matter that we've been wanting to see LEGO cover either again or for the first time for years. Unfortunately, the prices of this wave are honestly some of the worst prices I have ever seen for not just any wave of LEGO Star Wars sets, but really any wave of LEGO sets in general. And there are some very notably poorly priced sets here that really just make no sense to me, other than, well, LEGO probably just assumed that people would be willing to pay for them. Honestly, the wave itself is not quite as bad as I think a lot of people are saying. I think that opinions online have been incredibly divided, but I think a lot of that is also due to the price. Obviously, these sets are not perfect. I have a lot of thoughts on the Clone Turbo Tank in particular being a much more shrunken down version of what we've gotten in the past, but altogether, I do generally like a lot of the builds here. It is just, unfortunately, the prices of the wave that are dragging it down. Now obviously, while these sets were sent to me by LEGO to review for free, and I'm very grateful for that, it's my job here to provide as objective of a review as I can. So I will not be holding back. I'll be brutally honest about what I think about the prices, and honestly, it does make it very hard to recommend pretty much almost any of these sets on retail release until they actually go on sale. And we'll be diving a lot more into that later on in the video. But I do want to start off on a high note by saying that I am very happy with LEGO listening to fans in the sense that we are getting sets that I know fans like myself and others have been asking for a long time. A Separatist MTT, the V19 Torrent coming back, a Playscale Django Slave 1, a 327 Trooper Battle Pack, even another UCS ATST, and a remake of the Clone Turbo Tank. These are all really cool things, and some of the minifigures that we get in these sets are absolutely phenomenal, like the Clone Wars version of Obi-Wan Kenobi with great printing on the sides of the arms. So, with every LEGO Star Wars wave these days, there is a lot of good and there's also a lot of bad. So join me as we jump into the August 2025 LEGO Star Wars offerings, going from the smallest set to the largest, although unfortunately, the smallest set is maybe the most overpriced. This right here is 75431, the 327th Star Core Clone Trooper Battle Pack. It retails for, just believe me when I say this, $45 US or 40 euros, and comes with only 258 pieces. Yes, out of all those pieces, 4 of them are Clone Trooper minifigures and 3 of them are Super Battle Droids. But it does not make any sense to me that this is $45 US, especially when there is literally an equivalent Clone Troopers vs. Battle Droids battle pack on the market that is $30 and offers basically the same exact thing that you can see here. Set number 75372 came out just last year. You can still buy it online and came with the exact same number of minifigures and even 2 more battle droids than we get in this set, because this one has 3 super battle droids but no regular battle droids, and that one had 3 super battle droids and 2 regular battle droids. It doesn't make any sense to me how that set was able to be $30 with 215 pieces, but this one at $258, sure there might be a few more pieces, is $45. Now, I'm going to try to set my thoughts on price aside until the end of showcasing this set in the review, because I do want to actually holistically review the building experience and the minifigures and give my honest thoughts on what I think about all of them, but it is very, very hard to ignore the price, especially because that is kind of the focal point of talking about the set. Aside from a small ground-mounted blaster, which really doesn't offer that much in terms of play, I guess it does have the stud shooter firing function. One of the side builds we get in the set is this spider droid, and I actually really like it for what it is. 2022's ATTE was actually the last time, to my knowledge, that we got one of these dwarf spider droids, and the build is pretty improved since then. I actually feel like this is a lot more realistic compared to the on-screen appearance as opposed to some of the other versions that we've gotten in the past, and personally I am really happy with the design of this particular build. The eyes are more fully integrated into the dome, which isn't really something they've done in any iterations of it in the past, and instead of using the movable gun turret element, which they typically used to depict this droid, they've chosen to depict this with one of the 3x3 semicircle domes, which I actually think does wonders in terms of the shaping. They would not have been able to pull this off without the usage of two relatively new pieces on the back of the spider droid itself. They're new curved elements we first saw last year in the buildable C-3PO, and since then have appeared in a ton of different colors. I like how you can kind of pose the eyes. Obviously the turret can be moved up and down, and the legs are also more posable than ever. There's a lot of different joints on the legs, and I'm personally really happy with this build. It's not 100% perfect, but I actually think this is the most screen accurate version we have gotten to date. The detail is great, and there's really not much to complain about when it comes to taking a look at this droid. I honestly hope that they put this build in a magazine or something like that so people will be able to army build them, because it is genuinely a really good build. But moving on to the main build of the set, and that is the ATRT for the 327th. We haven't really seen 327th troopers for a long time. In fact, the last time we got 327 troopers at all was back in 2005 and 2007 when we got the Clone Troopers Battle Pack and the original Clone Turbo Tank for the Revenge of the Sith wave. So obviously a lot has changed since then, and it's really cool to get them back again. As far as the ATRT is concerned, it's a pretty standard build. It's almost identical in build to a lot of the other ATRTs we've gotten in the past for the 501st and just regular ones as well. Obviously very, very oversized compared to what the ATRT is supposed to be in universe, but I think that for a Legoification of this vehicle, the scale is something I've really gotten used to, because this is basically the Lego version of the ATRT, and if you really wanted to make a minifigure scale version, it would be really finicky and very small. They only really attempted it once as a side build deploying from the Clone Turbo Tank all the way back from the Clone Wars series, and honestly that's kind of fitting, because there is another Clone Turbo Tank in this wave. As far as the build is concerned, I actually do like the shaping on the front of the build. I think that the angles used for the wedge plates and the triangular flags really just make it feel very nicely armored up, and the decals are quite nice as well. It's a lot of stickers for a relatively smaller set, and I guess I say smaller set, but this is $45, still feels like a very small set to me. But altogether, I think the actual build quality of this particular ATRT is pretty good. I'm very happy with the build, not really anything else I would have changed. Is this worth $45 though? Because really, it's this and the Dwarf Spider Droid, and a few minifigures. The answer is absolutely not. But before we get into my final thoughts on the value of the set, let's take a look at all the minifigures that come with. Technically, there are two different clones included in this set, but really the only difference is that one of them is using the new rangefinder piece that they introduced for the UCS Django Fetts Slave 1 earlier this May, and I think it looks really good. What's far more exciting though is the usage of a brand new molded plastic pauldron element. It's the very first time we have gotten a molded plastic pauldron, and I think it actually looks really good. I guess LEGO decided that it's hard for kids to put on cloth elements, and the rules behind that internally at LEGO are always very confusing to me. Like, we get cloth elements for LEGO Dreams all the time, but for Star Wars, I guess they decided that we shouldn't do it because kids have trouble putting it on. I don't really know, but it is actually really nice to see a plastic version because it actually fits maybe even better than a single cloth pauldron piece would fit, and it looks very screen accurate, so I'm a big fan of that piece. As far as the rest of the detailing on the figures, you know, say what you will about helmet holes, I actually do like how you can get multiples of the same clones and then just add different accessories to them by utilizing the same helmet piece. I think that is good. However, I do not like that there are two holes on the side of the helmet. It doesn't really make sense to me that there's like a fake hole and then a real hole. I don't know. I think that if they just consolidated it into one hole, yes, it would still be inaccurate because it would be moved a little bit too far up, but I do like the extra functionality to add in the rangefinders and the binoculars and all that. The detailing on the clones are honestly pretty decent, not really much else I would expect or want from clones like these. They do fit in visual style-wise with all of the modern clones we've really been getting since the 501st Battle Pack era back in 2020, so I do like the visual consistency, and especially the dark gray kind of shadow lines around the helmets. I just feel like that adds a lot more detail. But with that, we have summed up my thoughts on this battle pack. $45 US. That's right, 45 for 258 pieces is absolutely ridiculous. I cannot recommend this set. And look, I've seen a lot of people online saying we gotta boycott this Star Wars wave and send a message to LEGO that we're not gonna buy it. And while I respect that, I'm gonna be completely honest. I don't think the actions of one fan base are going to particularly sway LEGO's decisions. However, I feel like these sets in this wave, and this one in particular, are so egregiously overpriced, you don't even need a boycott. Like, people are just straight up not going to buy it anyways. I respect it, and you know what? If you feel that strongly about standing on your principles, I 100% can get behind that. And I will say, as a reviewer who got this set sent to me for free by LEGO, I am even the one saying that it's ridiculous and you should not be buying this set. If I'm saying this, that is saying a lot, but again, you don't need to hear it from me. I genuinely think that the general public will reject the notion of a $45 battle pack that includes just this. Maybe if there was a equally substantial side build, like some sort of a larger side build for the Separatists to actually come in on, maybe even 3 more battle droids, or include like a 5th clone trooper, I don't know, something to make it seem more worth it, that would be great. And the really funny thing is, when prelim images of this leaked, there was actually a very tiny, it was a minuscule, but there was a tiny side build of terrain, and somehow that got removed from the preliminary version of the set to the final one, so they actually took something out. It wasn't even that substantial, and it wasn't nearly enough to make it worth it, but I do find it crazy how they genuinely think they can get away with charging this much for this set because, well, people like clones and people will buy them. And here's the thing, I like clones, I like this set, I genuinely do. I think it's a solid set. It's a solid $30 set tops. 25 to 28 is very fair, 30 would already be pushing it, but 45, sorry, not to end this one on a bit of a downer, but I just cannot recommend this for the price. Obviously though, those are just my thoughts, so do let me know in the comments if you agree or disagree, but with that, let's move on to the next set. This right here is the V19 Torrent Starfighter. It's the first one we've gotten since 2008 when the Clone Wars TV series first launched, and obviously a lot has changed with LEGO since then. This retails for $65 US, comes with 567 pieces, which, I mean, on paper isn't great, but compared to the rest of this wave is honestly not that bad. And it does come with a brand new Clone Pilot minifigure with a long-awaited accurate helmet without a fin, a new version of Clone Wars Obi-Wan Kenobi with arm printing, and a new version of Asajj Ventress. But first, let's focus in on the build of the ship. The transformation feature is very simple. You just basically move the wings by themselves. There are clips and bars in a system that allows the wings to lock into place for that first wing, and then the side ones are just mounted on Bionicle style ball joints. One thing I noticed that I found really interesting as a Construction and Bionicle fan is they've actually recolored the ball joint element for this set, and it wasn't just this one. They recolored it for some of the other ones in this wave, this time appearing in light gray, and I'm sure that's going to be really useful for large action figure fans like myself, so I'm very happy they actually recolored that ball joint with axle hole going through it for this set. Don't really know why they recolored it because it is totally fine just being in black, but I'm very happy they did. Taking a look at the size of this model, that is the first thing I really have to point out. Compared to the older version of this set, the V19 Torrent is a lot smaller, and this pretty much is in line with what LEGO has been doing over the past few years, which is scaling down a lot of the builds to make them a little bit more detailed, a lot more stable, but unfortunately trading in size for that. And I'm a little bit mixed on that, because on the one hand, I actually really like that sets these days are now a lot more detailed than they used to be. You see, back then we would get absolutely gigantic sets that were really big and fun to play with, but if you just look closely, the detail wasn't there, they were very flimsy, they tended to fall apart very easily, and oftentimes you just have a ton of exposed studs, you'd have wings that were just a single plate thick. They were really stretching the budget to make it bigger and have that be paramount. Now, they've basically changed the strategy by a complete 180. Instead of making things a lot larger, they're trying to scale things down and make them more accurate, more detailed, but also a lot more stable. And with that stability comes size as a compromise. I'll save my full thoughts on size comparisons to my review of the clone turbo tank, but I do just have to say it does sort of make sense as to why this is a little bit smaller. That being said, for a V19 Torrent, this definitely feels a little bit too small to me. I think for the price point that they were building this at, which was $65 US, I would have expected something at least a little bit larger. And this issue seems to really only affect LEGO Star Wars sets for some reason. Like if you take a look at a $65 Ninjago set, I feel like I'm getting a much larger vehicle out of it. So I don't really know what it is about Star Wars in particular, but it might be biased because we do have older versions of the models to compare them against, as opposed to something like Ninjago or some other original LEGO theme where you don't really have that original point of comparison. Now, comparing this model to the actual on-screen appearance in the Clone Wars, I do like a lot of the details, but I definitely do feel that they could have made certain aspects a lot better. One of the bigger things that stands out to me are these stickers used on the front engine intakes of the craft. To me, that feels a little bit sloppy just to have stickers be used there. We've seen LEGO do a lot of really clever building techniques to have that sort of T-cross element inside the engine, and then have an actual molded detail for the inside of the engine piece. And for whatever reason, they decided not to do that for this set. It's not like they were running out of budget, because I do feel like this set is really overpriced for what it is, so I definitely feel like that is the weakest part of the model in my opinion. Same for the bottom engine. They really didn't even bother to try to detail up the bottom engine at all, instead just using a small single element that doesn't really feel quite right compared to what the rest of it is supposed to look like on screen. As it is, I definitely do think that this is a decent, smaller scale representation of the V19 Torrent, and I do like the scale that it's at for a playscale model, but I don't know, something even just 20% larger would have felt a lot better to me. Still, the building techniques are very solid. I do like the ability to move the wings up and down, and it is quite satisfying to move that top wing forwards and backwards. It just very satisfyingly clicks into place. I just feel like maybe this should have been a little bit larger. It's not even something like the clone turbo tank, where I feel like that should have been a lot larger. This just 10 or 20% bigger would have been perfect. But now let's take a quick look at the minifigures, and the minifig selection of this set is absolutely fantastic. Only 3 minifigs for a $65 set isn't the best, and I definitely would have preferred to have at least maybe just one more. How about a Clone Wars Anakin thrown in as well, or another clone trooper? But if these were the 3 minifigures we're getting for this set, it's alright. I was about to introduce this figure as the highlight of the set, but honestly, the other 2 figures in the set are so good, it is hard to pick a favorite. This is a brand new Phase 1 clone pilot, and it fixes one of the major issues that fans have had with the clone pilot for years, since we first started seeing them pop up in the Clone Wars sets, and that is the fact that clone pilot helmets are very different than standard Phase 1 clone trooper helmets, in that there's no fin on the top of the helmet, and finally, they've molded a brand new piece to fix that, which I am very, very happy about. I cannot wait to get a ton of these. I want to add them into all of my Clone Wars era ships, and I hope that this is just the beginning of getting more sets featuring this minifigure. But moving on from that, hello there! This is Master Obi-Wan Kenobi, and it is a phenomenal minifigure. I love the printing on the arms here, which is absolutely deluxe. The Clone Wars version of this character is the one that I grew up watching, so I definitely have a soft spot for seeing the amount of detail factored into this particular figure, and it has literally been years since we've gotten a Clone Wars version of Obi-Wan Kenobi, so this is phenomenal. The robes look fantastic. The printing of the Republic logo on the arm is so so good. Even the angry facial expression works so well. The only thing I think could have been improved about the figure would have been dual molded legs, and I know that's a lot more to ask on top of an already phenomenal figure, but it is very obvious where the front of the robes begin and stop for the armored boots, and personally I feel like that extra detail would have been perfect to send this figure to some of my favorite figures of all time. Moving on from that, we have Asajj Ventress, who suffers from a similar issue of really needing dual molded legs based on the graphic design but not having them. Otherwise though, the rest of the figure is pretty good. If you actually look at Asajj Ventress's outfit from the Clone Wars series, I don't know if it should have been this purple. I actually think the dark blue color scheme she had previously was a little bit more accurate compared to what the color scheme looks like here, but it is hard to say. I mean, from certain angles, it is a very purple outfit, so maybe I am just used to the dark blue version that we got originally, and purple is a bit more accurate. If there was just another shade of purple, it would have been good. Altogether though, the figure is good. I like having a non-Clone Wars animated version of Asajj Ventress's face. That looks great, and again, could have just been improved by dual molded legs, but otherwise I'm happy with the figure. But with that, we have summed up my look at the V19 Torrent set. Let me know down in the comments, what do you think of this build? Do you like it? Do you dislike it? Do you feel like it's worth $65? Because I don't think so. 50 would have been good for it. For 567 pieces and 3 great minifigs, maybe 55, but 65 is pushing it a little too much, but that's just my opinion. But now, let's move on to the next set. This right here is set number 75433 Django Fetts Starship. Hot off the heels of the UCS version, this is our Playscale version, coming with 707 pieces and retailing for $70 US. On paper, that actually seems like really good value. You get 3 minifigures, Django, Boba, and Lamasu for the very first time in minifigure form, but in hand, I don't know, I am not feeling $70 whatsoever with this set. It feels to me like this should be closer to 50, which doesn't really make sense given the parts used, but I guess since so many small parts are used for the details, you're not really seeing or getting a chance to experience the full benefit of those 707 pieces. Still, that being said, it is a little bit harder to complain about the price of the set when almost every other set in this wave is way more overpriced, egregiously so compared to this one, so you know, I'm counting my lucky stars and I'm not going to complain too much more about that. Moving onwards to the actual build itself, it is cool that this does come with some sort of a display stand which doubles as a transport cart which you can use on Kamino. I don't really know if that was necessarily needed, and I would have been very happy to take like $5 to $10 off the cost of the set just to not have that, but you have to admit it does look very good on display, having a stand of its own to actually make it look like it is flying. So I do appreciate that they did decide to put that in, even though for me, I don't really need it because I'm just going to hang it from my ceiling. On the back of the set, you can deploy a handle, which is a very simple Technic function. You can just remove it and swoosh it around. And speaking of the back detailing, I actually really like that despite the small scale, you can very clearly see the engine detailing, the yellow lights on the underside. I just think that is a really solid play feature to be able to swoosh this around. Putting this down on the ground, basically where it belongs, you can see you can put Lamasu in the cart for whatever reason, you can have him drive it, but let's focus in on the Slave 1. The building techniques used for this build are actually really solid. I genuinely was very impressed, especially at the smaller scale, that they were able to capture a lot of the very iconic angles of the Slave 1. The entire back neck section is mounted at a very slight angle. There's even a play function to drop these seismic charges just by pushing in the ramp, which is super simple, but one that just works so well. And I'm really happy with how that was able to be pulled off because it just looks really good as a play feature. Overall, the actual sculpting of this build is very impressive. It's very similar to 75312 Boba Fett Starship, which we got all the way back in 2021, although that one was $50 for 593 pieces, this is $70 for 707, but if you compare the two side by side, they kind of look like they're at the same scale, so I don't really know where the extra pieces are going into where this one's concerned, other than maybe some of the shaping on the front, but it even looks like they're utilizing some of the very same pieces, so I really don't know where those extra pieces are going, to be honest. That being said, the angling is very good. As I rotate this from side to side, you can see the very slight back angle of the build, and it's definitely something that LEGO would not have been able to pull off just a few years ago. It's clear that that even for smaller playstyle sets like these, building techniques have improved so immensely that LEGO is able to achieve really fantastic detailing on a model this small. So that is a very, very good sign to me. Altogether, it is of course very swooshable, and I really do like how it is a cheaper alternative to the UCS set, which is on shelves right now, which really allows you to have an option for kids to play with it as well. I do have my thoughts on the Django Fett minifigure not being quite as good as the UCS one, but again, we'll save that when we talk about the minifigs. Taking a look at the inside of the cockpit, I'm also impressed that it's able to fit both Boba and Django inside. It is genuinely kind of a feat of engineering that they were able to fit both figures in there. Boba just kind of has his own spot where he just sits in there, and then Django can sit down on the studs, so I actually think that's really cool. On the back ramp here, you can also see that despite just a very, very small scale, they've been able to add just a little bit of detailing in to kind of make it almost like a midi-scale version of the ship. And while I do miss the days of us getting playscale style Slave 1s that actually were a lot larger and a little bit more one-to-one scale when you have a play with a minifigure, I actually do like that they have this smaller alternative now that there is a much bigger Django Fett Slave 1 on store shelves. Although of course, if you compare this with the 2002 version, it is really night and day. They are not accomplishing the same thing whatsoever. But with that, let's take a quick look at the minifigures, and if you saw my review of Django Fett's UCS Slave 1, you've already pretty much seen the other two, so we're going to start with Lamasu, our very first minifigure of this character. This is only the second Kaminoan minifigure ever, but honestly, we've gotten the two important ones, so while I would like to see some of the ones that appeared in the Clone Wars series, I'm very happy that we did get the two most important ones in sets. One for Obi-Wan Kenobi's Jedi Starfighter, which is still available for purchase, and then one for Django Fett's Slave 1, which is actually a really good 2-pack set if they ever wanted to release it. The new mold for Lamasu is fantastic. I like how you can turn the head, and it is pretty much the perfect minifigure representation of the character, so I'm very happy. Django Fett, on the other hand, is a little disappointing. Obviously, they made the perfect version for the UCS set with arm printing, but again decided to make that figure exclusive to the UCS set, so they removed the arm printing from here. This is a very controversial topic, but let me explain myself. I am very kid consumer friendly. I've had a lot of people comment in my videos like saying, hey, I like to get an exclusive figure when I spend like $200, $400, or $700 on a set. And I do understand that, but at least for me personally, when I'm spending $700 on a LEGO set, I'm spending that amount of money because I think the build is awesome and big. I am not necessarily spending it just to get an exclusive figure, and while it can be a nice bonus, if it's as important of a character as, say, Captain Rex or even Django Fett, I would prefer that the best version of that character also be available to kids who want the chance to play with that figure themselves. I know if I was a kid, 5, 6, 7-year-old Chris would have loved to get the fully detailed version of the minifigure with arm printing, but I certainly would have been able to afford the big UCS set with my allowance. I mean, honestly, I probably wouldn't have even been able to afford this $70 set, let's be real, unless I saved up for like half a year. But you know what I mean, it is good to have cheaper alternatives to models and still have the same figures. I get it, there are some people who just absolutely do not like that, and I will not be able to change their minds, and I'm not looking to change any minds, I'm just looking to state what I think is what LEGO should be doing, which is including these same fully detailed minifigures in very expensive sets and cheap sets as well to allow kids to play with those characters. But that's just me, and clearly LEGO has decided to listen to the portion of the fandom that really does feel strongly about having exclusive figures in sets like UCS sets, so they've decided to remove some of the special printing for this set in particular. And also, may I add, literally spend more money and make a new special element frame just to make this without arm printing, which is kind of funny. They have spent more money to make something more exclusive. Boba, on the other hand, is very nice because Boba Fett is identical to the one that appeared in the UCS set, so I have absolutely no complaints. And with that, we have summed up my thoughts on Django Fett's Slave 1. It's on paper, good value, 707 pieces, $70 US, that's a 9.9 cent price per part ratio, but price per part ratio is not everything, and I think this set is very emblematic of that. We got pretty much the same exact scale of the same exact ship just a few years ago for Boba Fett Starship, the Slave 1, and that was only $50. It came with less pieces, but again, I guess other than the function to drop the seismic bombs and the extra minifigure, I don't really know where those extra pieces went into, and I would have been a lot happier if they've had a way to make this set $50 or make this set a lot larger than the last one for a $70 price tag. That's all I have to say about this one. It's a good build. I like the sculpting and shaping. I genuinely do think this is a really well done build. I just feel like it is a bit too expensive for what you get. But hey, what else is new? Let's move on to the next set. This is the buildable K2SO figure. 75434 comes with 845 pieces and retails for $90 US, which is maybe one of the best valued sets of this entire wave. It comes with a buildable droid K2SO model, which is pretty much in line with all of the other buildable droids we've been getting from LEGO Star Wars so far, Chopper, R2, C-3PO, and all of the like. And I actually really like this build. It is maybe one of my favorite ones, especially because this one is surprisingly posable. Compared to those older models, which I guess had a few functions here or there, but largely were mostly static, especially like C-3PO, this genuinely feels kind of like a display model, but also a very posable action figure style build at the same time. And I really appreciate that. It comes with a printed display plaque, like all of these specialized Star Wars models have been getting, and I really do like that these are printed now, especially even for the smaller droids. Getting this level of special detail is very, very nice. So altogether, I do like it, and the detail on it is pretty accurate. I am not like the biggest, craziest Star Wars like lore information plaque superfan, so I will not be able to spot misspellings or mistakes in the plaques, but for whatever reason, they often do have mistakes, so I would read the brick set review if you want to see if there's any mistakes in this one. Moving on to the main build of the model though, it's always really impressive to me building these and putting them together to see just how much detail can be packed into a scale replica of these droids. I love how not only is this very detailed, but you can kind of move it around as well. There's a little bit of waist articulation, and altogether there's a lot of posability that can actually come out of a model like this. Now the proportions of K2SO are very, very unique compared to even other Star Wars droids. He's very spindly, the legs are super long, the arms are long and skinny, and that is really hard to depict in a stable model, but they managed to pull it off pretty well for a build like this. The only thing that I think is throwing me off a little bit about the pose is that the legs for the bottom legs are splayed outwards at a very wide angle, but the upper legs are just perfectly straight. I don't really know if there was a better way to do it, especially because, again, the stability had to be the #1 thing when factoring this in, but if there was a way to have had those lower legs tuck in a little bit, or maybe even have the upper legs splay out a little bit, I feel like that would have looked a little bit better, but otherwise, every other detail is very impressive. I like the motion for the waist here, which kind of makes it look like he's walking back and forth. Obviously right now I'm showing the full range of motion that you have for a build like this, but even if you just swayed it very, very slightly back and forth, you can kind of make it look like he's walking, which I really appreciate. The head itself was one of the more mixed elements of the design when I first got it, but honestly it has grown on me. It's not quite perfect, but I really can't think of any other way to depict K2SO's head in brick-built form. And obviously if you really wanted to, you could also just swap it out for the CCBS buildable figure version, which was basically just a one-to-one perfect version of K2SO's head, if it really bothers you that much. But for me, I actually think for a brick-built rendition utilizing no brand new elements, just existing pieces, it looks pretty good. And it's one of the first times I've actually seen LEGO use the Technic pin underside pieces as the actual pupils of the eyes there, which is a really nice touch. Articulation-wise, you can move the arms back and forth and rotate them as well. The hands are mounted on mixel joints or mini ball joints, so you can get articulation there, and you even have the option to articulate all the fingers and the thumb, which is very nice. This allows you to get K2SO in lots of different positions. You can cross his arms, you can have him be pointing at something, or whacking someone, or maybe even slapping Cassian across the face. There's a lot of different things that you can do with the model, and that's something I really do appreciate, because again, posability is often not something you consider when building a model like this. Taking a look at the full range here, you can see that despite the very skinny proportions, there's a lot of different things you can do with the build. The head is actually pretty interestingly mounted. The head itself is mounted on a click joint, which allows you to kind of have the head set a little bit lower, make him look a bit more hunchbacked, or maybe make him look like one of the more standard Imperial security droids where the heads are more hunched and they feel very robotic, and then you can transform him into a more expressive K2SO by having him kind of perk up and his neck sort of straightens up as he looks towards you, so that's something I really like. Obviously, you can see that there is a really good range of motion when it comes to the hands as well. Being able to bend them in pretty much every way you want can really allow you to pull off different poses. Like right here, I'm kind of making him point off into the distance, which I think is a really fun and dynamic pose, and there's a lot more that you can do with that to just make it feel more dynamic as a build. So I'm a big fan of how they were able to pull that off. Altogether, the posability of this set really elevates that beyond what I would expect, and I'm very happy and pleased with the amount of playability that you can get out of it despite it being primarily a display model. This is in no small part due to the designer of the set, Peter Carmichael, absolutely cooking on the build for this. He's actually a friend of mine, and I promise I am not biased when I say this is genuinely a really good set. He designed what is probably the centerpiece of my LEGO collection, the underwater Aquazone base, and he also hooked me up with a wooden LEGO duck, so I mean, maybe I'm a little biased, but I do genuinely think this is a really solid build. And mad props to Peter for this being his very first LEGO set. I'm really excited to see what he does from here. There were some building techniques used on this model that genuinely blew me away, that I have never seen be used on any other official LEGO set, and that's saying a lot because I have almost all of them. The usage of these rubber tire elements is obviously pretty standard for around the wheels there, but there is a very interesting usage of another black one right around where the neck attaches, where you can see that kind of just sits there, but it's held into place by a number of pieces. It's there at an angle to kind of show a neck socket, and that genuinely blew me away when I put it together. I was not expecting it to be that solid of a building technique, but it totally fits in. It's like the piece was made to be put there, and that was so impressive. So when putting this together, I thought that was super cool, and I really love just learning a lot from the process of building this set. Overall, for $90 US, I think this is probably one of the only fair price sets of the entire wave, and it makes sense because it's kind of its own thing. Whereas most of the other sets have to deal with minifigures and whatever else they're trying to depict in comparisons to other larger and older versions of those models, this is just a standalone buildable figure of K2SO, and it is absolutely the better for it. $90 does feel pretty much just about right for this. For 845 pieces, maybe 85 would have been a little better, but again, it is really hard to complain when you're getting something as good as this. Of course, much like the others large-scale droid figures, this does come with the minifigure version of the droid in question as well, and K2SO is unchanged from the Andor U-Wing, but it is a really nice figure, and I love the printing of the Imperial logo on the side of it. Altogether, I'm a fan of this set. This surprisingly became one of my favorites of the wave, which I was not expecting at all. Nothing against it, I just never really appreciated the buildable figures more than the standard minifigure based ones. I always found the minifig based sets a lot more fun to play with, but this is genuinely fun, posable, and accurate, and at a pretty decent price. So it might actually be one of the best sets of the wave. With that, let's move on to our next set. This is set number 75430, Wicket the Ewok. It's our second buildable figure of the wave. It comes with 1,010 pieces, a minifig of Wicket, and for whatever reason, retails for $130. Don't get me wrong, it's not a bad model, but 130 is kinda crazy in my opinion to charge for something like this, especially when after having the model in hand, it does feel pretty small. I guess that's kinda what it's supposed to, because again, it is a buildable Ewok, so they're kind of these small, cute, and cuddly creatures, and a lot of pieces absolutely go into the fur, and the shaping, and the realistic sculpting, but 130 is a lot of money to pay for something like this, especially compared to some of the others similarly scaled models like the Grogu models, which are actually a little bit cheaper. But altogether, setting aside the price, let's dive into Wicket the Ewok as a buildable character. The one thing I will say is that whenever LEGO tries to depict buildable characters like these, the big question is it gonna fall into the uncanny valley, or is it actually going to be cute and looking good? And this is maybe the one model that kinda does both for me. Usually it's very clear-cut, like the buildable Chewbacca. Freaky head, absolute uncanny valley, do not like the head on that one. Or as opposed to something like Simba from The Lion King, or maybe something like the Stitch buildable figure, where I think they absolutely would nail those figures. They're super cute. Here, I guess it is pretty accurate, the build is very good, but looking at the face, it is very hard for me to decide. Is that accurate? Is it cute? Is it terrifying? Which is it? And I don't know. I don't think that if I were trying to design this as a model, I would have been able to do even close to as good of a job as this does, much less a better job. And if you compare it to what Wicket looks like in the movie and what all the Ewoks look like in the movie, they are kind of freaky, like they're not the most cuddly creatures. If you look at their faces, this is fairly accurate. So again, it does feel accurate-ish for what it's supposed to depict, but it is still a little bit freaky in its build. I'm gonna start from the bottom and work our way up here. The legs are pretty much built separately, but they are basically joined together, so there really was no reason to build them separately, but I do like how they're a little bit offset compared to each other, so it isn't just a standard rectangle block. The fur is really nice. I like how the fur is very layered. There aren't very many gaps here for the model, and I think that the building techniques used to accomplish the very seamless transitions from cloak to fur to arm to leg are done really nicely, and that is especially evident in the way the hood drapes around the face. There's a good amount of detail here, like nougat boomerangs being used on the hood to represent the stitching that he has on top of his head, the way the hood falls over the head there, which really makes it look like he is wearing a hood, but also has a very expressive face poking out from underneath. There's a nice little kind of furry, almost beard-like section sticking out from the bottom there, and then that transitions very nicely to the rest of the model being this really well done layers of fur, where you look at every single angle and it is covered in all sorts of different studs and fur pieces, which actually looks really good for this character because the studs almost give it a bit of furry texture. Altogether, I am a big fan of the building techniques used in this model. I genuinely feel like I kinda learned a lot when putting this together, so I'm pretty happy with the building techniques used, and I really like the consistency with the way the toes and fingers are depicted to have these more rounded fingers and toes that are pretty much just using these same exact elements to pull that off. Altogether though, we should take a look at the face, because the face itself is really interesting. They're utilizing the relatively new LEGO Friends gumdrop candy piece, which is similar to the early Coverlight piece that we got all the way back for the monorails, but this time it's a lot more rounded, it sticks to studs better, and they're using it for the nose, which looks really good. Specialized printed elements for the boat studs are used for the eyes there, which look good. The teeth are also pretty nicely done, so again, it does look fairly accurate. The only thing is that maybe the eyes are a little bit too big. I almost feel like if it had more beady black eyes, it could be the printing on the eyes as well, it could have been a little bit better, but altogether it is hard to complain about the model because I do feel like it is a really good representation of Wicket. Did anyone ask for a buildable Ewok? I don't know, I'm very curious to see how the set performs, but it is good on its own. The minifigure version of the character is new. They also recolored the spear in Nougat, which is a nice recolor to get for that. That's the very first time it's appeared in that color for a classic piece to get a new color. So overall, happy with the figure, but moving on to closing thoughts on the set as a whole. $130, I think way too much money for something like this. I think it is cute for what it is. It is actually fairly accurate for the build, and I think it is a good representation of the character. I'm just not super convinced that it should have been $130. I think $100 would have been pushing it for this set, but $130, unfortunately, cannot recommend. That's all I have to say about this one, but do let me know in the comments what you think of this model and if you're going to be picking it up. But now let's move on to something a little bit more interesting in my opinion. This is the brand new Clone Turbo Tank, aka the Republic Juggernaut, which is the official name of the set, probably because LEGO no longer wants to use the word tank in a set name. It's set number 75413, and when this was first leaked, I was so excited. Finally, for $160, 150 euros, we were going to get a return to form, a massive clone turbo tank to rival even the bigger ones that we got from the very first version we ever had. And then the images came out, the piece count came out at 813 pieces. And yeah, massive this is not. $160 for 813 pieces for a set of this size is bonkers. It is very rare for me to say off the bat that this set should be 50% off. This set should be $80, and yet it is $160. And I stand by that. If this set was $80 US, this would be hailed as like one of the best Star Wars sets of all time. Yeah, the clone turbo tank is small, it's a lot smaller than I think it should be, and it's not the greatest build, but for $80, that would be pretty perfect. Okay, at least they're depicting it at a smaller scale. But $160 is absolutely nuts. It does not make any sense to me. I don't understand why this is $160, and unfortunately, I feel like that has very negatively colored my opinion of this set and many other people's opinions of the set as well. Because on its own, I actually think this is kind of fun to play around with. It is very steerable, it is easy to roll around, it can go around rough terrain. I was just having fun the other day rolling it around my bed, and I was really enjoying that. And for the briefest of moments, I forgot I was living in a world where I was playing with this toy and forgetting that it costs $160. But alas, reality set in, and I began to wonder why on earth anybody would pay $160 for something like this. This is, by pure physical scale, the smallest version of the clone turbo tank we have ever gotten in LEGO form. We've gotten quite a few of them over the years. The first one was 2005 for the clone turbo tank 7261, then we got one in 2010, 8098, then we got one in 2016, 75151, and now finally we're getting this one, 75413, and it's even smaller than the one we got in 2016, which was only $110 and came with 903 pieces, which was actually more pieces than this one. I don't know, it is just baffling to me. I'm sorry to keep waffling on and on about the price, but I really am not happy with the price of this model. And I feel like that is really hurting the set for me, more than it would a normal set, because I'm actually quite annoyed at how expensive this is. It is one of the most egregiously overpriced sets of the year. It's the new Hoopty, it's the new General Grievous' Starfighter. Those look like bargain deals compared to this. But enough about the price, let's actually finally take a look at the actual model and see if there is any merit to the model by itself, which I actually think there absolutely is. Detail-wise, I've seen a lot of people complain about the brick-built wheels, how they're wasting the budget, and they basically shouldn't have been brick-built, and it's just a way for LEGO to add an excuse to use more pieces. And let me say this, LEGO was not having to come up with excuses to use more pieces. When this set has like 800 pieces for $160, I don't think that's it. I actually think what they were trying to do was they had to make the wheels be brick built because they don't really have an existing wheel piece that fits this exact scale. The last time they had a set at this similar scale, they used the LEGO Castle wheels, but honestly, these do look a lot better. I like how you actually have detail added into them. The wheels themselves are built really nicely, and I also actually appreciate the fact that they feel like they're made for rough terrain. They're the most accurate wheels we've ever gotten for this model, so I'm actually kinda okay and happy with the wheels being brick built, and clearly they didn't inflate the parts count that much because it only has 813 pieces to begin with. But moving on to the rest of the model itself, I think the shaping is pretty good, okay in some areas for the most part, but there are some strange oddities to it. There's a very obvious gap on the top of the model, and that is supposed to be to place a minifigure in that seat, but when there's no minifigure, it is a really weird and obvious gap, and I feel like that totally could have been just covered up by a few more pieces. Same goes for the side of the model here, where there just clearly is just a very big gap on the side of the build, which could have been plugged up even around the sides of the window pane here. There's just very obvious pieces that I feel just don't really feel congruent with the very armored look of the vehicle. Thankfully, when you rotate it to the front, there are pretty much no gaps. The front cockpit is really solid, but the back one just feels a little bit iffy when it comes to the way it's put together. Altogether though, I actually do like the building techniques used for the steering function. There are rubber elements being used in the centerpiece to allow you to pretty much have it always steer straight, but also allow you to have it steer back and forth. And of course, this does have a quote-unquote full interior, although again, there really isn't that much to the interior. It's basically just seating space for the clone troopers. I do feel like this could have been really benefiting from some sort of a deployable speeder or ATRT, but wait, that wouldn't have even fit in the model because the model itself is so small. So all they could even do with the space was put in seats, and even then, you're gonna have a hard time getting your finger in there for some of them. The back cockpit does have seating for one minifigure, maybe two if you really squeeze them, but really it's supposed to be just one figure in the back, and the middle part here doesn't even have any interior space. It's really just all for show. So as it is right now, it is just a fully empty model, pretty much no interior, but the only big improvement they've made to this set over previous iterations are the usage of the brand new transparent 2x4 plates we first saw in LEGO Minecraft being used on the sides of the windows, so the windows aren't just pasted on top of the actual panels here, they actually are somewhat see-through and they do let light through. So I do think that is a big improvement, the way they've done the windows, and they've only been able to do that since they improved the plastic they use for transparent pieces and actually allows you to have them be made as plates now, which I think is really nice. And I can't wait to see how many doors that opens for LEGO building in the future. Who knows, fully transparent minifigures may be possible. Altogether, this is a frustrating set for me. I actually kind of like it as its own sort of standalone build as a smaller scaled version of the Juggernaut. $80 would have been perfect. I would have been like, okay, obviously this isn't like the play scale clone turbo tanks of old, but it's not trying to be. It would be like, this is the Django Fett or Boba Fett Slave 1, right? If we're getting that for $50 or even $70, sure, it's a lot smaller than what we used to get, but it is also a lot cheaper. It's made for a different audience, I get that. But if you're charging $160 for a clone turbo tank, I expect that to be a lot more sizable than this. LEGO sets have gotten smaller over the years, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. As I mentioned in my review of the V19 Torrent, I was saying that basically LEGO went from an original model where basically they were maximizing size and they were making things very flimsy and under-detailed, and they were trying to make them as big as possible. And now they've kind of course-corrected in the complete opposite direction, where models are becoming much and much more smaller and more detailed and more stable in the most part. But again, that is a big trade-off with size, and this is very emblematic of that. If only the price also reflected that, I would have been totally fine if this was $80. But alas. Jumping into the minifigures, let's take a look at the first figure here, which is Ki-Adi-Mundi. This also brings up a completely different point of topic about this set, where this scene is clearly depicting a scene featuring a UTAT and not a Juggernaut, but LEGO decided to play it safe and go with the Juggernaut, but I'm not going to fault the set for being a completely different thing than I want, so we'll leave it at that. Ki-Adi-Mundi is pretty nicely detailed, and I didn't notice any differences in the headpiece compared to the one we got last time in 2016, I believe. So it has been a while. I don't have the original figure on me right now. It's back at home and I'm not at home, but it is a really nice figure as it is, no real complaints. Much more exciting though are the additions of Ki-Adi-Mundi's troops for the very first time. This right here is Commander Bakara, making a minifigure appearance for the first time in LEGO form with a brand new helmet mold. I am a big fan of this piece and I cannot wait to see what LEGO does with the piece. There are a lot of other clones they can use with the same helmet, so I love that piece and I think the clone itself is really nicely done. But where are the helmet holes? I kid. This is actually really nice, and I'm very happy with this figure. The other figures included in the set are the Republic Commandos, and they also are really nicely done. Again, these are figures we've been wanting from LEGO ever since they appeared in Revenge of the Sith, and we still haven't gotten them ever until now. They're utilizing another brand new helmet piece being used for these figures with a dark red and white dual molding. I mean, maybe that's where the budget went, having two new molds for the helmets, but again, it still doesn't excuse $160. I'm not letting them off the hook that easily. But I will say, again, these figures are pretty nicely detailed. It would have been cool to have, again, a cloth comma be used where clearly they have parts of a comma being printed on, or at the very least, maybe like dual molded legs, like mold the upper legs in dark red if you really don't want to have kids put on a cloth element. But as it is, I actually do like these figures, and I'm very curious to see if they're going to use that helmet piece for like snowtroopers moving forwards, or if they're just going to use the same one that they've been using, because that one technically is more accurate, but this is very perfect for the Galactic Marine piece. It is a slightly different shape, and they've pretty much perfectly captured it, so I actually really like the figures here. Lastly, it does include 3 battle droids. I would have been totally fine with no battle droids and like a few more dollars off, but I guess you do need to have an opposing separatist faction in this set, so you get some battle droids. They're okay, they are unchanged since 1999 basically because their design is without flaw. Moving on though, I think I've summed up everything I have to say about this set. Again, not happy with the price at all, $160, crazy, you know the drill, that's all I have to say about this one, but alas, I do feel bad because I do think that this is genuinely a fun set. It's a lot of fun to play with, the minifigures are phenomenal, the build is genuinely fun, and while it is a lot smaller than the other sets that we've gotten similarly in the past, it is a good build, it is decent for what it is. It's just way too expensive, and that sums up my thoughts. Can never recommend this set at full price. Not even at like 20% off. Like, I can really only recommend it at 50% off, and you're never gonna find it for 50 off, so it is what it is. That's all for this review, and hope you enjoyed. Let me know in the comments what you think of this model, and let's move on to the next set. This is set number 75435, Battle of Fallujah Separatist MTT. It retails for $160 US, comes with 976 pieces, as well as a ton of minifigures, a ton of battle droids, 6 to be specific, 3 new commando droids in gunmetal gray, Ayla Secura making her first appearance since 2016, and Commander Bly for the first time in minifigure form, which I'm very happy with. This is sort of meant to depict the obviously Battle of Fallujah, but also scenes in the Clone Wars TV show where the Separatist MTT prominently featured, and I am very happy with its inclusion. You see, I've been wanting a Separatist MTT for years. Ever since seeing it feature in the Clone Wars, I really wanted to get it in the dark blue and light gray color scheme, but LEGO kept on releasing the more iconic Trade Federation one in brown. I actually think this is a much cooler color scheme, so I'm very happy LEGO finally decided to do this. However, we do have to address the elephant in the room first, and that is the price. $160 for 976 pieces on paper is pretty bad. And while I will say price per piece ratio is not everything, it's a 16.4 cent ratio if you're curious, I definitely feel like it has negatively affected this set a lot. I went into the set really excited, I really like it, and it has a killer function. But a lot of that is taken away by the fact that this is remarkably overpriced, at least in my opinion. It's not quite as bad or as overpriced as the Clone Turbo Tank, but again, it's not really saying much when I feel like that set should have been $80 instead of $160, and I actually feel like this set probably should have been $90 or at least $100 instead of $160. But I'll save my full thoughts on price till the end of the review. Again, I do want to showcase everything this set has to offer first. I just wanted to get it out of the way as we jump in here. Now that was a quick look at the function, and don't worry, I'm going to be showing that a ton more times throughout this review. One, because I do want to have you see it from all different angles, but two, because it is genuinely very, very satisfying to actuate. This is the most function-rich MTT that we have ever gotten from LEGO, and it's no big surprise because this was designed by LEGO Master Boone, who recently joined the LEGO group and has been putting out some amazing sets, and it's very clear he was able to really improve the functionality of this model far and above beyond any other MTT we have seen from LEGO ever before. The last MTT that we got was back in 2014. It's been over 10 years since the last one, and the one before that was 2007, so a lot has changed, and it's really clear that they were able to have such a robust function because of some new pieces and new elements introduced in the time between then. One of my favorite aspects about the droid deploying function here is the fact that it kind of lowers itself to the ground right upon going out of the build, which is actually very screen accurate. If you watch the appearance in the movies and the shows, it kind of protrudes out from the MTT and then lowers down on a rack. Obviously, there's a lot more racks from there's a ton more battle droids coming out of it, but for a very simple play feature for a smaller build, this works so well, and I am very happy with the functionality to even have the droids kind of deploy outwards as they lower themselves to the ground. Unfortunately, because of gravity and the way that it hits the ground, sometimes you can knock battle droids off if you're not too careful, or if you're kind of lowering it to the ground too quickly, but if you have a controlled motion, it is just really satisfying to see them deploy like this. And there you have it. It doesn't always press them down to the ground, because sometimes things get caught, but 9 times out of 10, it works really well, and it is really impressive how it also closes up the bottom and top hatches automatically when you actually have it be fully closed. This to me is the ultimate MTT function, and I can honestly forgive a lot of my issues with the price and the value of the set because the function is genuinely so good. I want to see LEGO do more clever stuff like this in other sets. This is the kind of set to me that lives or dies by the functionality, and it absolutely lives by that. It is really, really well done. But enough about the function. What about the rest of the set? Well, taking a look at the set from all different angles, I'm pretty happy with all the way that it has been armored up. There are really nice pieces being used, different wedge elements and slope pieces being utilized all around the model to actually give it a really nice color scheme that feels very clean and slick. Maybe it's just because we've never gotten a Separatist MTT before, but to me this feels so much cooler than the standard plain brown that we're used to getting for the regular MTTs. I think a lot of it is also due to the fact that the color scheme has different layers to it. The light gray has armor layers with the dark blue, and altogether it makes it feel very playable. What I'm not a big fan of though is the usage of red on the inside. I don't really understand why the red is there. I guess for the building experience, I know why LEGO does this, to make it easier for younger builders and new builders to identify colors, but red is a very, very bright color to use, and I feel like maybe any other color would have been fine. At least make it like bright blue or something like that to make it fit in with the rest of the model, but unfortunately, because it's red, at some angles you can kinda see it poking through, so I'm not the biggest fan of that. The interior of the model is basically taken up almost 100% by the function. Unlike some previous MTTs which had like speeders deploying from the back or storage areas or little droid areas to kind of add in other characters, basically the function has to work the way it does by eating up the entire interior. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think it is a necessary evil for its function as cool as this, but it is unfortunate that this set is so large and basically the entire interior is dedicated just to that one function that pretty much just is on the front of the build. If they had some extra pieces for the budget, I probably could have seen them putting some sort of archway above this function and allowing you to have maybe some sort of a build above it, but alas, they did not. Oh, but wait, they did, because it was $160, so they absolutely had extra budget. So again, I don't know, I'm being a little sarcastic there, but I really feel like maybe the interior could have been fleshed out a little more, but it is hard to complain when that function is really good. At least there is weapon storage on the inside, and it is maybe one of the most lackluster weapon storages we've gotten, with them literally just sticking directly into the Technic beam. But hey, if you're on limited parts budget and designing a set like this and putting all your parts in the function, I get it. Moving onwards, there is at least a little bit of an upper section over here featuring a pilot battle droid, which is nice to get. I think we need more pilot battle droids in sets, especially like these, and he does have his little area in there with a nice spot to store the blaster as well, which I actually do really appreciate. On the inside, you can also see some sort of a Separatist war map sticker being used on the inside there, so I think that is a nice touch, but altogether, basically, this model is the function. It lives and dies by the function, and I think that function is great. And so, stepping back a little bit, I do want to talk a bit about value here, because this wave in particular is kind of infamous for being ridiculously overpriced. Somehow, this is 976 pieces at $160, and it's still not the most overpriced out of the wave, and that is saying a lot, unfortunately. I'm gonna save my final thoughts to the end of the video, but now let's take a quick look at the minifigs, starting off with Aayla Secura. Aayla Secura has been featured in minifigure form a few times now, but this is the latest one, and I actually like a lot of the details here, except for maybe the face. I don't know, the face just doesn't feel quite right to me. It's kind of hard to put my finger on why it doesn't look right, but there's just something about it that doesn't quite resemble the actress playing the character. I think the angry face is a lot better, especially where you can kind of see the gap in the teeth, which really just adds a bit more character to the minifigure here, but the standard smiling expression just doesn't look quite right to me when depicting the character. Again, hard to put my finger on why, but it is what it is. The Twi'lek hairpiece though is very nice. I really like seeing the Lego being fully detailed with the bands going all around the kind of cross-stitching areas of the Leku themselves, so I think it's good. The torso is pretty decent as well. Don't really have anything that positive or negative to say about the torso compared to the previous versions. It just kind of looks right, but the face just isn't 100% there. However, Commander Bly, on the other hand, is very, very good in my opinion. I am a big fan of this character, and the figure itself is done remarkably well. LEGO introduced a brand new pauldron element for these figures this wave, and that's one that we saw for the review of the battle pack as well, but I'm a big fan of them using it. It's really cool to get a specially molded pauldron element, and it even looks better than the cloth ones did, and that's really surprising to me. He also has an exclusive torso compared to the ones featured in the battle pack, so this minifigure is 100% all new, and that's because the belt is actually colored yellow. So the scuff marks on the back are a little different, otherwise the torsos are identical pretty much, but the belt is yellow and the scuff marks are a little bit different, which really just set them apart from all of the other clones, and I like the extra effort LEGO put in to really make him be 100% accurate. I'm sure a lot of people would have been complaining if he wasn't, and utilizing the rangefinder element is a really nice touch. Moving on from that, it's interesting to get commando droids in the gunmetal gray color. Maybe just mentally, I always think of commando droids in the dark brown color because of the LEGO ones, but when I actually think about them, and I'm actually looking at Wikipedia right now and taking a look at the commando droids, they actually did come in different colors. So I think gunmetal gray is alright, and it is nice to get a pilot droid as well being featured here because this one is just absolutely needed for an MTT. Minifig selection wise, I think it would have been cool to get a security droid. It's been years since we've gotten a security one, and that one feels like it would have been a good fit for this set, or maybe even a tactical droid. It would be cool to see them bring that back, but as far as it goes, minifigure selection is alright. It does come with a STAP as well, a single trooper aerial platform, and it is interesting to me that LEGO has like 4 different builds of the STAP on market right now. Like, we've got this one, we've got the Rebuild the Galaxy one, we got one for the Battle Droid with STAP buildable figure just like in the July wave. So it is kind of funny how LEGO is just so many different versions of this just in this one year, but I think this one is just okay. Nothing really strong I have to say about it one way or the other. Altogether, this is a frustrating set for me because it genuinely is one of my favorites of the wave when it comes to the functionality. I think the functionality of this set is better than really any of the MTTs we have ever gotten before. But it is absolutely bogged down by the price, and I really feel like 160 is too much for this. I get it, a lot of those pieces go into the function, it's also cool to get the new minifigures and everything, but for 976 pieces, I feel like this should have not been more than $100. If it was $110, I would begrudgingly accept it, very begrudgingly so. But 160 just makes it very, very hard to recommend the set to really anybody without getting it on some sort of a discount. Doesn't need to be a 50% off discount like I was saying for the Clone Turbo Tank, but some discount for sure, absolutely needed for a set like this, and we'll have to see if it ever will go on sale. That's all for this review, hope you enjoyed our look at the Separatist MTT, and let's move on to the next set. This right here is our latest UCS set, and this is the UCS AT-ST. It has been a long time since we got the last UCS AT-ST, so this is a welcome upgrade. And there are some very significant improvements with this one as opposed to the older model which came out in 2006. It comes with, of course, a printed display plaque like all of the UCS sets do now, as well as a brand new AT-ST driver minifigure with printing on the side of the arms, which is very nice, it's very deluxe, and something that they seem to be doing as a special thing for a lot of these UCS sets. Of course, the main focus is on the AT-ST itself. And the major thing this does differently from the previous version is actually splaying out the legs ever so slightly. They're utilizing a combination of some relatively new plate elements which have curves on the ends of them to allow the legs to be splayed out, and it looks really good as a final model. It just feels a lot more realistic and alive as a build compared to the older versions of the set, and I actually really appreciate just how much functionality they were able to pack into this thing. The set retails for $200 US and comes with 1,513 pieces, which is actually pretty decent for what it is, especially being a UCS set, and when you compare it to the last one which had around 1,000 pieces and retailed for $80 back in 2006, the value is absolutely there. I'm going to start by taking a look at the legs and working our way up with this model, as I do with most of these large sculpture models, and you can really see that there's so much intricate detail packed into pretty much every single square inch of this piece. I like how the build for the toe looks. You actually can kind of wiggle it around a little bit, and while there is zero articulation in the legs, I can excuse that because this is a UCS model. It's not really meant to be a play model, so it's alright for this, although I am very much looking forward to LEGO finally, hopefully, making an ATST that actually does have some articulatable functionality that we've seen in the movies, because we've never actually seen an ATST that can articulate to the level of which these machines can walk in the movies themselves. Looking at the legs first, you can notice that there is really intricate detail being used for the tips of the toes, and one of my favorite pieces is that while this doesn't have any mechanical functionality, the way that the legs are built make it look like it does. Pieces are arranged in particular ways, like for instance, this 1x4 tile on the back of the legs there that makes it look like that might be connected to some sort of piston on another part of the leg. And everything does feel like it's built with intention here because, again, it is as screen accurate as possible. As we snake our way up to the rest of the model, you can see some pieces like the paint roller holder pieces, the Sensei Wu staff pieces being used on the side here, as well as even just little bits and pieces of Technic adding in extra layers of detail and granularity to the model. It has a lot of greebling all over the legs, which does feel very in-universe and accurate for what this is supposed to depict. I do find it really interesting how, compared to even the older UCS ATST, it's still using the same exact curved elements that were used on the feet of that one, so I guess some things really do never change. But that is really where these similarities begin and end. Almost everything else about this model has been remarkably improved. I like the usage of the whip on the underside to suggest some wires coiling back and forth, but that's not even the most clever build for a wire in this set, and we'll take a look at that in a second. As we move on to the back side of it, it is appropriately detailed with the two vents on the back there. There's really nice detailing as you swing the head back and forth, and you might notice the usage of the new LEGO collectible race car F1 car handlebar pieces that they're using on the underside of the head to act as a very small black wire that is just kind of sticking out from the underneath. That is the kind of detail that I really love when I'm building a UCS set, and it's something that just looks really good on display. I'm a big fan of how they're able to pull that off. But with that, let's move on to the way that the actual head looks, because there's a lot of things you can do with the head as well. The underside of it is appropriately detailed, and as we move up to the front, you can actually angle the front gun upwards and downwards, as well as sway the head back and forth, which is pretty good for what you would expect for this model. The head itself is mounted on a ratchet joint, so it does stick in place exactly where you'd want it to stick, as well as the gun at the bottom being mounted on some Technic pins and clip attachments, which really allow you to move it back and forth, but again, also keep its shape. In contrast, the guns on the side honestly feel like they have a little bit too much friction to me. You can spin them back and forth, but they are a little difficult to turn, especially because they're utilizing some turntable elements and clutch power from the studs around the radar dish elements. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but they do feel very tight, and so that's just something I did want to point out. This does have sort of a full interior, and we'll get to that in a second there, with some pretty strange additions on that, but I do want to wrap up by taking a look at the rest of the head here. I think the detailing on the back is quite nice. You've got some vents on the back. The plate detailing for the sides of the almost like cheeks of the ATST look great to me as well, and altogether, I do think that this is a very decent representation of what the model is actually supposed to look like. Moving to the top of the model, we have a nice hatch which can open up, and obviously that's meant to be the screen accurate way to open up the hatch here, but of course they do allow you to remove the entire top component and have it swivel upwards to give you access to the interior to be able to enjoy it yourself. This is not minifigure scale by any means. This is a lot larger than what a minifigure scale ATST would be, but this is what the inside of the cockpit looks like. One of the strangest design decisions to me was the choice to print the ingot detailing on a sticker and attach that to a 2x3 brown tile. I don't really know why they didn't just brick build like two 1x2 tiles in brown and then a single black ingot. Maybe for stability, but that is a very weird choice for the seats. Otherwise though, you can see what the controls look like. There's not that much else to see there, and we can move on to the rest of the model. I was curious about one other thing, and that was if the kind of eye sockets of the ATST could be fully closed up by moving these armor pieces around, and they don't unfortunately fully enclose. I feel like that would have needed a slightly more unique mechanism or intricate mechanism to make that function, but they definitely do the job. I think they look totally okay, and they are stable enough for this model, and so I really don't have many complaints about that. Overall, I kind of want to sum up this review by talking a little bit about the value here. This set retails for $200 and comes with 1,513 pieces, making it one of the smaller UCS sets in recent memory. In fact, the second smallest UCS set we have gotten recently has been 230 with the TIE Interceptor, and that one had nearly 2,000 pieces. Compared to that, this doesn't really quite feel like it's worth 200. Maybe 150, 160, at tops 170, but honestly, for 1,513 pieces, I personally would have been a lot happier if this was just a little bit cheaper. I could even see them justifying 180 because it is a UCS set, but it just feels so much smaller than almost every other UCS set we have gotten in recent history. The only comparable one was maybe the A-Wing from 2020, which had 1,600 pieces and also retailed for $200, but even then, for whatever reason, that model did feel more substantial and larger to play with than this one. Nothing against the model, I think it is a good build, but 200 does feel like a little bit too much. Lastly, we'll take a quick look at the ATST driver here, and this one is a nicely printed one. The printed arms do add a lot to the character, although it is unfortunate that LEGO will pretty much only do this for UCS sets. I'd love to see them do it for standard sets as well, but I get it, it costs a little bit more to do that for standard minifigs, which is why they pretty much save it for expensive sets. But with that, we've summed up my thoughts on the UCS ATST, so let me know in the comments, what do you think of this one? Clearly, LEGO is kind of holding off on releasing a big UCS set until maybe a few months later, but it is kind of weird to get 3 UCS sets in 1 year, but you know, I'm not complaining. And with that, we have summed up my look at the entirety of the August 2025 LEGO Star Wars wave. Absolutely, probably the most controversial wave of all time. The builds are generally good, but a lot of people aren't happy with how small they are, and that is exacerbated by the prices being out of control. Again, as I mentioned, there is one more set for Rebuild the Galaxy, and I'll be reviewing that one separately. I wasn't allowed to include it today for my main mega review, but these are the mainline Star Wars sets, and it is a very eclectic wave. A big prequel and Clone Wars focus, but we do get a couple of original trilogy and extended media stuff like Andor with K2SO, and Ewok, as well as Return of the Jedi's ATST, whereas most of the playscale system sets are all Clone Wars based. It's an interesting wave for sure, and when the set list first leaked for this, I thought this would be like the all-timer Star Wars wave, an absolute favorite, smash hit, and clearly LEGO thought so too, and that's why they were able to price it this high. I think LEGO actually has a pretty good sense of the pulse on what people want to see from LEGO Star Wars, and they kind of price things accordingly. It's very obvious LEGO expects this wave to perform well, but honestly at those prices, I don't know if they're gonna perform that well. I'm honestly a little bit concerned for how these sets are going to do, and I hope that it doesn't give LEGO the wrong impression that people don't want to buy prequel-themed or Clone Wars-themed LEGO sets anymore. That's absolutely not the case. I was really excited about a lot of the sets here, it's just that they are so expensive. Of course, those are just my thoughts. I do have to keep things honest here on DuckBricks, even though I do get sets sent to me for free. It is my job, again, to give you an honest opinion and not try to delude the buyer into thinking something is worth it just because I didn't have to pay for it. Because if I did have to pay for it, I would not be very happy paying these prices, and I just want to make sure that the viewer knows that as well. Again, a lot of good stuff here. I like a lot of the sets, but it is what it is. Not too happy about the prices, and that's all. Thanks so much for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe for even more LEGO news, reviews, discussion, and analyses coming your way very soon. Thank you so much, and bye for now.